Good morning, everybody. So really excited today. We're doing our first CRISPR office hours. One of the things and the reasons we wanted to do this was I know a lot of us are going through this uncharted territory, and we want to give everyone a sense of community and have a place where they can ask questions about their research, how other folks are doing, and how they're tackling this new norm that we're going through. So before we jump into it, I wanted to real quick do some housekeeping items. One, this will be recorded and we will have it available for people to view afterwards. And the next most critical thing, this is an interactive session. We want to make sure everybody on the call knows they can send in any questions they have. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And if we don't, we'll reach out to you and ask you directly or answer directly to give further clarification. And one of the things also is please don't be shy. The more questions you ask, the more interactive it gets, the more value we all get out of this. And again, bear with us. This is our first time we're going through CRISPR office hours. So we're working out some kinks and we'll be figuring it out as we go forward. So that being said, I want to take a moment and let all the presenters introduce themselves. I'll go ahead and let you get started, Kevin.
Thanks, Aditya. Good morning, everybody. We're all actually working from home, if you will, but more likely, in reality, we're trying to work from home through a crisis, a pandemic. So my name's Kevin Holden. I'm the head of science at Synthego. It's great to have everybody here this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, wherever you're joining us from. So hopefully this will be the first of many of these weekly chats we can do. We'd like to engage you, the scientific community, and people working specifically either in genome engineering or maybe you're working in a different area of science. You're just interested to talk to us and let us keep you company through this time. So, Hamid.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Hamid Ghanadan, and I'm coming to you from my home office in Boulder, Colorado, where it stopped snowing about 4 hours ago. And so happy spring to everybody. I'm the founder and CEO of the strategy and insights firm LINUS, and we are focused on the life science and health and wellness industry. And we provide insights and strategy and innovation for this industry. And I'm delighted to be here with our friends at Synthego and to participate in this CRISPR office hours. I'm very passionate about science and looking forward to seeing what I can provide to help everybody get through this time.
Great, thank you, Kevin and Hamid. And let me introduce myself. My name is Aditya Vempati, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Synthego. One of the biggest reasons why, I believe in the scientific community is just the power to invoke change, the power to really push humanity forward. And while we are in a pandemic, I feel this is one of those moments where we can get together as a community, as humans, and really make a difference. So that being said, we want to start things off in a little bit of a funny manner here. We're going to launch a poll real quick. And we really want to know, what is your preferred virtual meeting attire? And the options are, please take about 30 to 40 seconds to vote. The options are black tie optional, leather jacket, pajamas, lab coat, or business on top and casual on bottom. So for me, I know it's very much business on top, casual on bottom. What about you, Hamid?
I think that's on Twitter. I read somewhere that's actually called the pandemic mullet. That's what the business on top, casual on bottom, and I am actually fully dressed in business casual today, even though you can't see the bottom. But there have been times where I have gone on the very casual side on the bottom. So,
what about you, Kevin?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't vote on this panel, but normally I would say that I'm going to be probably casual, like I'm doing now, business casual all around. So, but I don't know, maybe I think the most fun is to change it up a little bit, put a fun Zoom background back there, maybe put a leather jacket on, some snow, make it look like I'm somewhere cool.
Nice.
I'm in mostly sunny California right now, but unfortunately, we're staying at home, so we're not outside enjoying the sun.
So real quick, sharing the results as everyone see, most people apparently go for the mullet, the business on top, casual on bottom, 72%. Well, I'm glad to see We all keep up appearances where it's needed.
Absolutely.
So that being said, let's get into a little bit of the meat of the things here. So as we're going through this, there's actually some interesting things that Hamid and his team have done in this pandemic to just really understand the community, what we're going through, and how we can support one another. Do you want to take a moment to, start off with that, Hamid?
Sure. I'll just very quickly tee it up. So as all of these stay-at-home guidances and shelter-in-place guidances were coming out in the early half to toward the end of March, my team decided to deploy a global survey about what's happening and how the life science community is feeling. And so I'm here with the initial results of that to share with your attendees and going forward. And Kevin is going to ask me some questions about it, and we're just going to share some of the key findings with all of you, and we'll go from there.
Great. Yeah. Actually, Hamid, I did have a question. Actually, first about LINUS, the company. Why'd you call it LINUS?
Thanks for asking. When I was first thinking of, so I'm the founder of LINUS, and the company is almost 24 years old. And, I was looking to pay homage to one of the great scientists that had influenced me in my life, who was Linus Pauling. And there's a couple of reasons why he really stood out to me as somebody who was really unique, is that he is the only scientist to win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes, one for his work in chemistry, and then the other one he won the Nobel Peace Prize for his anti-nuclear proliferation work. And also what's unique about him is that he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for a body of work that he had done, not for a specific experiment. And so he really struck me as somebody who was a Renaissance person. And so I wanted to pay loose homage to Linus Pauling. And so, and the name Linus is easy to say, it's simple, and I really liked it. And so Linus it is.
I was hoping there might be a Charlie Brown reference in there, but I guess not.
It's funny you say that. When I was doing research on the name, it did invoke a lot of Linus Van Pelt, I think is the name of the Charlie Brown character. And what I found is, I didn't know who this character was, so I had to watch a whole bunch of Charlie Brown to figure out if this is a good person or not. And I found him to be great. He's a wonderful person. And when people make that connection with the Charlie Brown, they actually remember the name of the company more. And even if they've never heard of us, they think that they've heard of us. So I thought it was all positive that connection exists. And even though that wasn't the original intention or the inspiration, I'm all very happy about it.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. So, I guess I would say that probably a lot of our audience are here. Mostly, most of them I would assume are working from home, and they're not in the lab right now. And so many of them actually will be genome engineers who are utilizing CRISPR for a bunch of different reasons in their research. Can you maybe tell us what inspired you to do this poll specifically now that we're entering this pandemic?
Yeah, so my colleague and president Kristen Apple and I were actually on March 12th on our way to a meeting here in Boulder, and we received a call from the person with whom we were going to meet, and that person decided to cancel the meeting. And within a matter of minutes, many of our meetings got canceled. And so we decided that we needed to find out what's happening within the life science community and to provide this information for the community, for all sides of the community, so that we can all understand and anticipate what's happening. And more importantly, for people not to make decisions based on panic or anecdote. And so we wanted to provide at least some grounding on what's going on and what to expect, so that decisions get made and better decisions get made, and maybe even opportunities arise out of this pandemic. And that was the original impetus behind it. And we moved really quickly. So I mentioned we had this experience on March 12th. We launched the survey on March 13th, and we had an initial baseline. So March 13th was a Friday, and we had an initial baseline by the end of the day that Monday. And then we've taken 2 time points since then, and we're going to publish the next major time point at the end of next week. So, so we're starting to look at, how this thing is progressing within the life science community and what the community is doing.
That's great. Maybe we're going to get started and start talking about the work that you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the next slide, and I can talk about who actually was our respondents. So we were able to gather just over 1,000 respondents for what we're calling the baseline study. And as you can see, almost 2/3 of the respondents were academics or work in a university, and then the remainder work in a variety of different institutions, many of them private business, like pharma, biotech, and CROs, and manufacturers of other products.
How did you actually interact with these people? How did you reach out to them?
Yeah, so we actually, because we're an insights firm, we actually have a fairly large database of scientists who have answered our surveys before and have opted in to participate in future studies. But we have several of our clients that we also called and told that we're doing this, and they said, you know what, this sounds like a great idea. I would like to support this, or we would like to support this. And so they actually sent a note on our behalf to their population, to their contact database or customers as well, to just, and it was, there was no, it was other than just general reciprocity. We're not sharing the individual data with any of these clients. We're just sharing it in aggregate. And so several other of our clients also participated in this and are sending people to the survey as well.
I see. Would you say that the breakdown you see here is typical of your database, or is it just kind of that's the response you got this time?
I think, well, it's more or less typical. We actually, our database is a little bit more balanced between industry and academia. And I'll share a little bit as to why we think that this was weighted a little bit more toward academia and a little less toward industry than our database itself. It's because we're actually seeing that there's a massive effort by pharma and biotech and also the contract research organizations to really move work forward. And so many of them have been granted emergency use exemption from shelter in place. And so there are folks that are working around the clock on this. We have a client, Charles River Labs, and they're really busy and they're working on this, and they're a contract research organization. They're one of the big global ones. So I think that it's that those people are just really, really busy, and so they're a little bit underrepresented in this.
So we got a question from the audience from Laura Saylor. What is the percentage of academics to industry in the N of 1011?
So the percentage of the academics is 68% of the 1,000 are academics, and then the remainder, other than government research and government clinical testing, the remainder are in some sort of an industry. And so I would say about 29% are in industry.
Cool. Another question we actually had was, how can I participate in this survey?
Awesome question. Thank you for asking. So we're actually going to publish a link to the folks that register for this webinar as well. And I just want to say I would appreciate all of you to participate in this. It doesn't matter whether if you're an academic or not. It doesn't matter where you belong. We want to hear from the industry, and we want to be as broad and exclusive as possible. So we're going to publish a link to take this survey. The survey is going to continue to be open for at least another month. We're going to take at least 2 more time points, data collections, so that we can see how this is progressing.
Great.
So another question that we asked, and this is a key one, is what do you do? So other than where do you work, what do you do? And so what is your main function? And so we see that 75% are engaged in R&D. 10% are engaged, they're called other, and these are folks who are either non-R&D professors, or they work in healthcare or different aspects of medicine. And then a variety of different administrative, general, and executive and management roles. One aspect, as you can see here, the ones that we highlighted in the blue, R&D, diagnostics, and manufacturing, are folks that we believe or have told us in the survey that they really require a specialized facility to be able to do their work. So obviously, many researchers require a lab, bench and wet lab settings. Folks in diagnostics, same thing. QC, they require access to instrumentation. Manufacturing requires require specialized facilities. And so as we go through the survey and as we started to look at who is being disrupted and what disruption looks like, we had to take this into account, that people don't have access to their facilities. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that affects the community in general. So let's go to the next slide, and I can talk about what we have found. And what's really interesting is that we found actually that the disruption due to this pandemic is really taking on 4 phases. And there's an initial shock of what's happening and what are we going to do. And then we're going to move into a phase which we've named the golden interim. This is a time where one can be in limbo, but we're finding that as the infection peaks and hopefully starts to go down, what the community is doing and how they're being productive. Then there's going to be a moment of transition back to the institutions. Now, this transition back is going to create a surge of activities, and we can talk about that in a bit. And then that surge is going to slowly start to come down into a period which we're calling the new normal. So the new normal is not going to be the same as where March 11th or March 10th, which was the last time you might have been in the lab. It's actually there's going to be a little bit of a different dynamics once this whole thing walks through.
Hey, Hamid, what would you say? Sorry, where would you say we are right now?
Yeah, great question. We believe that we're just passing the trough of the initial shock, and we're about to go into this golden interim time. We're still, it's generally still in the shock, but we're coming out of that. And the reason why I say that, Kevin, is because number one, we're measuring productivity, and productivity is really taking a precipitous dive. And excuse me, when we're asking people what they're caring about right now, what they care about is their own safety, their family's safety. Am I going to have enough food? Am I in danger in any way? They're not really focusing on scientific progress as much. And so what we're seeing is that now they're coming out of that a little bit. And, again, in the last time point survey that we took, which was this past Wednesday, people are starting to say that they're feeling a sense of calm and introspection now. And that's what we believe is going to be the starting point in that golden interim time.
That's great. So you talked a little bit about the initial shock and what happened there. Did you happen to ask any questions directly about of your respondents? Have you been told to specifically work from home, or has your laboratory activities closed down? Did you get a sense of what percentage of the industry is actually, participating in kind of a laboratory shutdown?
Yeah, so we have asked that question, and I believe 57%, if this is from memory, 57% at the time had said that that they're being impacted, somewhat, and 18% at the time said that they had no ability to do work, which was basically because they had no connection to their specialized facilities. That number has since increased from the initial baseline, and that more of the organizations have been specifically and explicitly told to work from home, or their institutions have been shut down. We believe that number is in the 60th percentile right now.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I know, at least from, interacting with, some of Synthego's customers and our friends, we found that there are some groups that are still trying to do critical work, Synthego included. We're one of them. And we've been working with, lots of different groups to try actually work on novel types of research for COVID-19. We can get into that a little bit later,
Sure.
Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the golden interim period and what actually means.
Absolutely. So this is a time where people are essentially ripped away from business as usual because of this pandemic. So it could be a variety of reasons. One is because they have, they don't have access to their facility, but from one reason or another, they've had to disrupt what was business as usual. And so what a lot of our respondents are reporting back is that they're planning on, engaging in a lot of writing, that manuscript that just, takes a long time to write because of everything else that's happening is now, can be a primary focus of a lot of scientists. Many of them talked about analyzing data from, in the past. And so, they have backlog of data and they're looking to doing analysis. Training algorithms is another way that people are focusing in on their time. So, and another aspect of what's happening in this golden interim time is really stepping back and really thinking creatively about their research project or new research questions or new methodologies, that they're really looking at how to really expand their research, literature searches, reading other colleagues' papers, all of the things that really are in some ways the most delicious and enjoyable aspects of doing science. But because of the daily activities of, going to committee meetings or being disrupted by other aspects not being there, is really giving a lot of scientists time to become introspective and think and be expansive. And so that's why we're calling it the golden interim, that it's not like a limbo or a purgatory interim. It's actually a golden interim, and people are really going to try to make the best out of it.
I guess it's also the golden age of learning how to use Zoom and internet conferencing. Yeah,
there's absolutely that going on too. So yeah, that's the golden interim period. When we asked our respondents how long they think that this period's going to last, 55% of our respondents are really hunkering down to saying somewhere between 3 and 6 months, which is really, that's a big time period. But also, if you really put it into context, into the academic context, 6 months takes us all the way to about August. And so, 3 months would be somewhere around June timeframe, end of May, June timeframe. And that's sort of where people are mentally preparing themselves for wanting to spend this time.
I think that might lead into a question, right, Aditya?
Yeah, it's actually a great one from Sarah Manar. According to you, how many months will have to pass to enter the new normal phase? What are the negative consequences in case you get used to working from home?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So if the golden interim time, or the time that this pandemic is disrupting people's ability to do, business as usual work, is somewhere between 3 and 6 months, that transition period is going to be fairly rapid, but then there's going to be a long tail of once things get back to normal productivity. And we actually believe that normal productivity is going to be a little bit higher than what it was before, because people have had this time to step away and think and become introspective and get rid of their backlog. But the transition time is going to be a time of a huge amount of fervor and a surge of productivity that's going to happen, because people are going to be let in to their, back into their facilities, and to be able to ramp back up. And so there's going to be a surge of activity then. And there's going to be a flood of manuscripts that are going to be going to the publishers, and, informatics tools with algorithms that are going to be trained based on data. And so there's going to be a lot of fervor during that transition period, and that's going to have a long tail. As far as negative consequences for being far away, one of the most interesting that we learned, and this was actually a direct quote from one of our respondents. They said, for every month that I'm away from my science, it's going to take me 3 to 4 months to ramp back up. And that's a big negative consequence. And that's so there's going to be productivity, meaning that people are going to be working, but that's going to be really taking up that ramping back up to be able to resume their work moving forward.
Cool. That's a nice, I would say, summarization of how you're thinking through this. And so one more question before we move on here, from Zoe Lienza. What characteristics of investigators suggest a greater resiliency amidst a public health crisis? Are there any elements of individual or institutions that might enable a faster progression through these phases, or is it predominantly environmental?
Well, boy, that's a big question. I think part of our intention for doing this research and really trying to find out what's happening, it was in part to be able to inform the institutions on how to go back. One of the best things that individual researchers can do once the initial shock is over, and once you're in, you're safe, your family's safe, your coworkers are safe, you figured out Zoom and have your sort of, the pandemic mullet all well set up. I think that's a time when not to forget that transition period and make a really explicit plan for that transition whenever it happens, so that not only are you efficient, but you're strategic about how you're going back, and what are the decisions, any key decision that you need to make it before that transition happens, so that once the institutions open back up, that you can get into full execution mode, and that you don't have to worry as much about, okay, now we have to make the critical decisions. Make the critical decisions beforehand. That's the number one advice that we're hearing and that what we're giving. The other one is just during the initial shock. I mean, if somebody's in shock, don't make any drastic decisions then either. Just make sure that you're comfortable and you're okay, and then moving forward. And then the last thing is, really, as far as institutions, to really think about what that transition is going to look like. There's going to have to be cleanup, because maybe some people left in a hurry. And so to go back to that kind of a situation, and really allow your research community to come back in a well-executed manner. And that's going to be different from institution to institution.
Hamid, speaking of transitions or decisions, did you get any inclination from any of your respondents or people you just talked to? Maybe their lab didn't close down, or maybe what they've decided to do instead of going back home from the lab and focusing on things like writing, analysis, planning, that they actually transitioned and pivoted their research into trying to help fight this pandemic. I know, we've definitely encountered quite a few of our collaborators and customers who are trying to do this now. They've asked us to help them. And, as a company, we've reached out to many individuals and other companies. We have an active effort to do this, also to see how we can all put our minds together during this time. Did you get any sense of that from anybody that you talked to, or if not, can you speak about it?
Yeah, so we can we can tell you that both through this research as well as through communications with a lot of our clients, that there's an active effort to switch as much of the efforts of companies in order to fighting this pandemic, whether it's development of new diagnostics, whether it's development of new research capabilities, or doing epidemiology studies, or correlative studies, or even just looking at developing therapeutics and vaccines. So I would say that while I'll say that research areas that have agency or credibility into that arena are making an effort to switch to the extent that they can. So for example, if a company has a diagnostics platform, they're looking at whether that can be used in order to detect the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, or even other viruses. I have a client, actually a connection with a company who does environmental detection of biological material like molds and things like that. And they're actually actively looking to see if they can, through air quality, see whether they can detect things like viruses. And that's very much in the active. So that's just an example or an anecdote of what you're talking about. I don't think that the community is misusing the ability to apply for the emergency use exception, to keep their labs open and then just go about doing their own research, whatever it was. I think people are genuinely focusing on the coronavirus if they can.
Cool. So with that being said, we actually have a great question from Vidya. Vidya's question is, would home COVID testing be possible with CRISPR? Detector protocol, for instance. You want to take that one, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it definitely could. So as most of you are probably aware, there's been, at least in the CRISPR world, there's been a couple of groups that have developed or reported on different testing methods for testing SARS-CoV-2. And so, one of those is the detector method that you mentioned that was developed by Mammoth Biosciences, our friends over there. And then there was there's also the Sherlock based protocol developed by Feng Zhang and Jonathan and Omar at MIT. And so, one of those is based on a Cas12 approach, right? The detector one's based on a Cas13 approach, directly going after the RNA. Yeah, so, I think what they've shown in both of those technologies is that, you've got a basically like a field deployable like analysis technology. And so, you can take a relatively unpure sample from a patient and you can then relatively quickly get an answer. So, those techniques do require some steps where you have to do an amplification. But I know that both groups are likely working on the ability to try to do this test either, away from a laboratory, like I mentioned, field deployable. I think maybe for the Cas13 test, the Sherlock one is a little easier. But to answer your question, I think, I think those groups, they're still working on testing those assays with, patient samples. And until they get an approval, it really remains to be seen. But I think it's definitely possible.
Cool. Glad to hear it. So we want to do a little thing, as Hamid took this poll and Kevin's, we've gone through the results from 1,000 other scientists like yourself. We actually want to ask you guys a question. And this is around, what is your highest priority / concern? Take a minute to answer this, but I want to read through the option. Is it you and your family's health or safety during this time? Ability to successfully conduct scientific research? Your students / staff's health or safety? Your financial well-being? Your community's health or well-being? Go ahead and take another about 30 to 45 seconds to answer this. But Hamid, Kevin, what do you guys care about in this situation? What are you really worried about as we tackle this pandemic as a community of scientists together?
Hamid, do you want to go? You go first.
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah. Obviously, just like anybody else, my family, friends, my elderly mom, my brother who actually has a pre-existing health condition, is immunocompromised, and also works at he's amazing. He works at a detox center, so he's coming face to face with people from all walks of life. Once I know that they're okay, then my focus is in on the scientific community, and really seeing how I can help. And, one of the things that we do at LINUS is we focus on how human behavior, just on, anything having to do with behavioral economics or behavioral psychology plays a role in sciences, because we believe that science is actually all factual, but it's driven by humans, and humans are, driven by behavioral rules that they work on. And so that's been an area of our own focus. And so we're looking at providing the right kinds of information and the right kinds of stimuli for the community to make sure that they're as comfortable and making decisions in the best way that they can. And so that's what I care about as much as possible, is just really buoying the scientific community.
I guess in many ways I'd agree. I think for everybody, probably the highest priority concern is yourself and your family's health and safety. I know for me, just definitely, thinking about making sure my parents are okay, and I've got a couple of older relatives in the United Kingdom, so just been checking in with them kind of on a regular basis, and friends I have in other countries, just seeing how things are going for them as well. But I think, the other thing actually, one of the reasons I was really excited that Hamid was coming on today is, for me, it's really important that the right information is spread out there. And I don't just mean like, you know, at Synthego, we're putting blogs up about these new detection methods for COVID-19, or we're having this discussion today, but I also mean just between my friends and family, right? So there's a lot of information that's getting put out there right now. So most of it is good, I would say. I'd say we've moved on from a lot of fake news in this, but I think that, you know, just kind of reassuring, based on my expertise, my training is in microbiology, you know, what can I actually share with people and help that become more common knowledge for everybody. And that's actually one of the great things, one of the shining points that come out of this whole thing, despite all the tragedy, is that, you know, I think we can talk about this a bit later, but I think there's going to be a greater focus on the good and the knowledge that that science can provide to our society.
Yeah.
So that being said, I want to share the results. So a lot of folks, as we asked, 61% said you and your family's health is their highest priority. Obviously, in this time, that makes a lot of sense. And the second one is the community's health or well-being. And what this really, I just want to point out, is nice to see, is we actually care about our family and one another. Yes, science is really critical, but to get through this, as this is a health-related pandemic, it's nice to see that we are prioritizing things that are important to us.
Are you able to show those poll results? I don't know if you can pop them up.
I just put them up. I think everyone should see them. So good point. So that being said, there's actually a really cool question that came in that I think relates to this. It's a good tangent segue. It was sent in via email. Folks, you can do that also as well after you register. I'm Maria Luna Perciado, and I'm a PhD student at University of Sheffield. As a consequence of COVID-19, universities have been shut down until further notice. With an exception for labs involved in fighting COVID-19, there are many PhD students whose work is strictly lab dependent and now might be affected by this necessary lab closure. Considering this might affect the completion of PhD students' thesis or work, I'm wondering, what will be the impact on career of those students? In some cases, there are strict deadlines which will not be postponed due to lack of further fundings. Is this going to compromise the appreciation of work of these unfortunate students? Kevin,
I'll share one aspect of our research. I mean, we asked about funding, and funding was definitely, I think, number 3 in people's concerns. You know, about how this pandemic was going to, you know, be shaped. You know, and it all depends on country and the different laws and the rules and the policies around the different granting agencies. I can just comment based on what we're seeing with respect to how the United States government is reacting toward the economic stimuli. Our hope is that there's going to be enough of that same sentiment to go into scientific research and to extend grants and continue to provide funds going into the different aspects of the sciences. I mean, if this isn't science's moment, as it were, or its finest hour, then I don't know that, and when that might be. And so we're hopeful that that lawmakers are focusing on this and are extending those grants. But I mean, as this information is really just coming into focus, there's no way to tell, and it is an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope compassion really becomes the law, the rule of law here. I think we're seeing in a lot of societies and a lot of cultures, right? You're in Sheffield. I know in the UK, the government is providing salary for people who are furloughed, 80% or something. I know here in California, they've basically told people to stop, evictions and things like this. So, I hope just kind of larger scale view of things that these granting agencies will realize what's happening and be more compassionate about their deadlines with the funding. So I hope that works out for you personally.
Yeah. Cool. So I think as we go through this and we have tackled it as a community and we're thinking through and having empathy, as you said, Kevin, and compassion for each other, I think it's going to be really critical to make sure that these deadlines, they can be extended. And I think everyone looks at it from that lens. So that being said, we have one more question. In light of FDA easing up on regulatory guidelines for COVID diagnostic testing, how do you foresee permanent changes in their approval process for diagnostics and therapeutics? Kevin, you want to go ahead and take that one first?
I think, Kevin, you're a better person to answer that than I am.
I'm sorry, can you tell me, hit it again? I didn't hear the last part of the question, the last two words, sorry, cut out.
Yeah, in light of FDA easing up on regulatory guidelines for COVID diagnostic testing, do you foresee a permanent change in their approval process for diagnostics and therapeutics?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have to, I just based on the fact that like what the world really needs right now is like consistent and, a volume of tests. So, really, I think what's become evident is, based on how contagious, the virus is, really the best way is to see how many people you can test, determine if people have become immune. We still don't really know if people, if once they are immune, if they are not likely to get reinfected again. So that's something to think about. But yeah, I mean, there just aren't, we've heard about governments not having enough access to enough tests. We've heard about people paying tons of money because they have privilege to get a test when there were healthcare workers that can't get a test. So, I really, what we need to see is just like a larger amount of tests in the marketplace. Now, obviously, like these have to be vetted, and the approval processes for these things are typically quite long, and for good reason, because they need to be accurate. And so, I think this is going to just be like an effort. It's whether it's going to be a manufacturing effort, or it's going to have to take a greater effort and a greater number of people involved in those organizations and institutions that are responsible for validating these tests. So, whether it's scientists like, doing secondary validations on pre-existing tests in order to qualify their own and then prove that data, it could be that. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it has to change. This is one of the things we're going to see that's going to change.
Yeah. I'll only add that if you think about the, regulatory bodies like the FDA, I mean, they play a critical role, right? Their role is to make sure that there's safety and efficacy in everything that touches the public. And so whether they're going about and whether they have kept up with the speed of innovation to change the way that they do that testing and policies, that's, I think that this is really enforcing everyone or really pushing them to change things permanently without foregoing quality, right? That's the hardest part. Is the best process for whatever you have is the fastest point to get from A to B without introducing risk or while minimizing risk. And that minimizing risk part is what's been creating a lot of backlog and creating a lot of aspects. And so how might they be able to do this? And what are they? My hope is that there's folks at the FDA as well as academics who are actually looking and doing longitudinal studies around what's happening to risk during times like this. And so then they can make a better prediction of saying, well, maybe a lot of our processes were unnecessary, or we can change them or evolve them in a certain way because look what happened during this pandemic. And that could be a silver lining in all of this. If they're actually looking at studying it as well at the same time as it's happening.
Would you say, based on your graph, maybe we can just go back to that real quick, the very last section, would you say that kind of fits in general into the new normal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the new normal is really going to, there's going to be fairly big winners and losers that come out of this. And so part of this is going to be, and this is why we're calling it a new normal and not the old normal, is because not only will habits have changed, and how we're also going to work differently, but also processes and policies will have changed as well. And, this is not to make light of this situation, but if you recall during the oil shortage about a decade ago, all the airlines instituted a baggage fee policy because they were like, well, we're going to have to charge for baggage because, fuel is more expensive. But once the cost of oil went back down, that surcharge just stayed, and so that's a new normal, and it's never going to go back to the old normal. And so I think that there's going to be a lot that we can anticipate from policy, and it's just as well as just processes and science in general. Like, I'm actually looking at how the publishing industry is changing, how much Bioinformatics is going to change as a result of this time, but also just quality control. One of the things that we learned is that in the golden interim, scientists are planning on data sharing a lot more. And so, collaborations are going to come out of this in new ways. That's generally a very good thing. But we're hopeful that the scientific community can maintain the quality control on the data, because, as we're sharing data sets with one another, we don't have a standardized way of making sure that the metadata also are, past muster. And so the quality control on what's coming during that transition period in the new normal is a question as to how the scientific community is going to handle that.
So yeah, I think I was just going to say that's really, I think what you said is a really critical point in terms of how scientists now are collaborating more. We're just seeing it every day, like whether you're on Twitter or you're just following press releases. It's really important. Also, the amount of preprints that are coming out. So yeah, thanks for speaking to that. I think it's a really critical point.
So we had a lot of conversation, I think, in the last 50 so minutes, and we're over time. But that being said, I do want to ask one question to both of our panelists here that I think is really critical for the community, and wrap it up from there. So this one, I want to ask both of you, what do you think is the biggest challenge for the scientific community next 3 to 6 months? If you guys could, maybe Kevin, starting with you, take about 30 seconds to answer that, and Hamid, chime in afterwards. I think this is something a lot of people on the line want to know.
I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be twofold. I think one is actually figuring out if they can, so we could talk about the academic world and also the biotechnology industry world. I think it's going to be figuring out what's really essential for them to do. So like kind of long-term, they're, hopefully everyone's frozen down cells they need to take care of. But I think it's going to go into do we institute kind of shift work in the lab so we can keep social distancing from scientists? That's one part of it. And I think the other, big challenge people are going to face, because there's some uncertainty about when we all go back to work for real, is, what do our plans look like on the other side? So are we going to try and make up for lost time and double our output? Or do we just kind of say, okay, this was like an extended early summer vacation holiday, and then we'll continue on? I think it depends if you're in academia industry, which of those you might be looking at.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Kevin. I think there's a couple more things that I'll just share a little bit of color, is that golden interim time, I think, has an expiration date on it, meaning that the productivity is going to start to decline again if that time is elongated back, beyond what the scientific community is willing to accept right now, because there's going to be an atrophy and there's going to be a lack of more things to do. So I've already submitted a bunch of manuscripts. I've already written my grants. I've already, analyzed all the data I had my hands on. Now I'm just frustrated and pessimistic and, not feeling like I can, continue. And now I'm scared again. And so that golden interim time is going, might dip back down again if it's much longer than what people are anticipating. And that's a worry, as people are going back into this. And then the next thing that I'll say is that I think, and there's been some companies that have already started on this, where there's abilities to, remote control lab work. And so, while it's still not 100% attendant free, there's a lot more, I think, that's going to be coming out in the new normal, where people are going to be setting that up a little bit more, where they're basically setting up remote, lab cells. And so then they can control them much more. And so I think that there's going to be more of an appetite, a long-term investment appetite in things like, IT infrastructure and more remote operation and automation and things like that. And I think the investment community is going to want to put more money behind that, so that they're not seeing as deep of a disruption. I don't know how long lasting that's going to be, but it's certainly something that, would make sense for the industry to put investment behind.
So I want to take a moment and say thank you, Kevin and Hamid, for joining us, and everybody else that was on the line and registered and sent in questions. We really feel like, as a company, as individuals and members of the scientific community, that together we'll be able to tackle this and answer the questions versus going at it individually. And we want to make sure to let everybody know that we aim to have anybody that wants to be a host join this broadcast. We're welcoming that. Send me an email, av@synthego.com, if you're interested in being a host or a panelist like Kevin and Hamid. And we'll be having our next broadcast April 9th at 9 a.m. And again, these are CRISPR office hours. We're keeping it as casual as possible, but give relevant information and make it as interactive as possible. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining. Thank you again, Kevin, Hamid. And please send us any questions you have afterwards as well. And we'll be reaching out with invites for the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Attire.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And I got to say, you guys, this is awesome that you guys are doing this. So I appreciated the opportunity to speak to your team and to address the community. So wonderful that you're doing this.
Attire, I just wanted to add as well, this is CRISPR office hours, and we did have a lot of questions about CRISPR techniques. I think what's happening with current events is just really super interesting for all of us to discuss in this way. And thank you, Hamid, for bringing your expertise and insights to this. It's really interesting work. In future office hours, we will definitely hit up some of your technical questions. So thank you for all those questions.
It's a great point, Kevin. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone.